Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on why businesses and individuals need to learn the skills of international trade. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I am the Senior Content Editor at the Institute of Export and International Trade. Open to Export is a free online service helping small businesses get ready to sell overseas through our step-by-step articles and guides, regular webinars, our Export Action Plan tool, and our quarterly competitions. You can find out about all of these on our website at www.open2export.com. Open to Export is powered by the Institute of Export and International Trade, the UK's only professional membership body for traders, offering a unique range of individual and business membership benefits, education and training catering for beginners through to master's degrees, and an always exciting and prestigious programme of events celebrating UK businesses' exporting achievements. We will be running a live Q&A at the end of the session, and you can ask questions at any point during the webinar using the question box on the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. Today we'll have Gavin Shakespeare from the Institute, and he'll be giving an overview of why learning the skills of trade is something businesses really should be doing, and he will be followed by two of our most recent students in Jen Butler and Gail Leeson. But to begin with, over to you, Kevin.
Hello, Will. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending today and listening. So before I start my slides, I'd just quickly like to introduce myself. Obviously, Kevin Shakespeare. I work with the Institute of Export and International Trade from both a training and an education perspective. I've also worked in industry for both exporting businesses selling overseas, moving goods overseas, and businesses who have imported as well. And I certainly sympathise with businesses and some of the challenges faced in both exporting and importing goods and services. And certainly the success of UK businesses is extremely impressive, and it's always great to have people learning and building their knowledge. So we move on to the next slide. So why should we learn about international trade? You can see a picture there. The actual second picture on the screen is of the Institute's graduation ceremony. So any of our students, learners who complete qualifications get invited to our graduation ceremony at the Mansion House in London, and it's always a very special day to really acknowledge the success of everyone learning, because education and training is not easy. It takes time, but there are benefits to doing it. It can be said sometimes that some businesses find exporting easy. That possibly may depend on the nature of your product or service, the nature of where you're exporting to. But as we're possibly seeing with events taking place in the United Kingdom, the exporting may get more difficult, and it is currently difficult anyway. And I know myself, having undertaken both training and qualifications in a number of areas over the years, that I felt that was the best to help myself, the company that I worked for, and to do a better job through getting a more in-depth knowledge. And certainly, as we're going to look at today, there are some potentially complex and harder areas in international trade, especially when businesses are being encouraged to go out and look to wider markets around the world. So at a high level, clearly what we look to cover in our qualifications is to obviously, for an exporter, to find the right customers and export markets, clearly to make sure they get paid on time, but also, I guess, to maximize the profit margins. So clearly fulfilling the export order and, of course, avoiding mistakes and remaining compliant is very important. If we could have a next slide, please. So how can the education help your business? So at a very high level, it teaches employees of companies how to export. And we've covered some of the areas in terms of getting procedures, processes correct, getting paid, identifying opportunities, and also managing potential risks such as financial and commercial risks, but also turning risks into opportunities. So that's about the teaching element, but also through doing the qualifications, it gives individuals and hopefully the actual business a real sense of achievement as well. It is a fantastic achievement, completing qualifications, especially if you're having to undertake a full-time job as well. And from a business perspective, certainly their employees doing qualifications can help with staff retention. It makes the staff feel valued and hopefully increases their commitment to the company as well. So it's an investment in people, and for the individual, hopefully it provides career progression, but also it provides benefits for the business in making the business more profitable, hopefully increasing sales as well. And clearly for the business, to say you've got professionally qualified staff really does support claims of a credible business. So the employees of a business understand what they're doing, and that can definitely help as well in terms of, again, of winning business and demonstrating both customer service, customer fulfillment commitment. And increasingly what we're finding in international trade is certainly compliance requirements, whether that's around customs compliance, whether that's compliance around safety and security in the supply chain, dealing with countries and companies that are not subject to sanctions, for example. And our qualifications really, we like to think, provide those competency standards, whether that's competency standards, for example, provided by HM Revenue and Customs, and in a topical area around Authorised Economic Operator, AEO status as well. So those competency standards are very important for businesses to achieve licenses and accreditation. So we move on to the next slide, please. So you can see here that we very much attempt at the Institute to cover qualifications that meet the issues of today. So it becomes a very practical exercise in what is happening and not just a theoretical learning exercise. So clearly, as we know today, we have some major implications for the UK and for UK companies. Clearly, there is Brexit implications. There's Authorised Economic Operator, which I've indicated, increase in trade and customs compliance, but there's also initiatives and opportunity. For example, blockchain technology, which has great potential to both improve the way trade is conducted and obviously for individual businesses to sort of take advantage from a technological perspective. And also we have a relatively weak pound in the United Kingdom at the moment, which provides opportunities, but those opportunities need to be either maximised and managed as well, which includes exchange rate management. So some of the examples of questions we get at the Institute on our help desk and the areas that we would seek to cover in the learning would be aspects around export licenses when they're needed, trusted trader, registered exporter status, commodity classification codes, specific areas around benefits of using an agent, differences with using a distributor, for example, documentation, invoice requirements, Authorised Economic Operator status. What does that actually mean? What are the benefits of it? Looking at trade instruments like documentary letters of credit and how they settle trade, and also what trade documentation is required when exporting certain goods to certain countries. So we are very focused on making sure that we cover specifics in the actual learning materials we provide, but also in the tutor and student interaction, which I'll be talking about shortly. So we move to the next slide, please. So in the context of what you learn, I've just put some headline points here of some of the different topic areas. There are a lot more topic areas, but these cover different elements of international trade, logistics and supply chain. And the extent to which they're covered or reviewed may depend on the educational level. So clearly, all our qualifications will cover the concept of Incoterms and commercial terms of trade. And trade documentation, for example. But as we get to the higher educational levels, it's more around a strategy of why they're used and how businesses can actually use them to maximize performance. Whereas potentially at the slightly lower educational levels, it might be more around what are Incoterms and how do they operate. So as you can see, we sort of try and cover all the different disciplines in international trade. And as we're going to look at shortly, we have some specific qualifications covering specific topic areas as well. We may, for example, in some of our modules cover the different ways of selling into overseas markets, trying to select and prioritize export markets. In other qualifications and modules, it will be around the export order process, the import process, how trade documentation customs work, and in others it might be effective use of finance, legal considerations, and commercial considerations. So clearly we look to cover all different elements of international trade, exporting, importing, logistics and supply chain. So if we move to the next slide, please. So how do you learn? So there's a number of ways in which we provide learning support at the Institute, and we sort of classify it as blended learning as opposed to distance learning. I think some of the context of distance learning can be seen as very remote. So you study on your own, you don't study with anyone, you're just left alone to get on with the learning, which is not obviously a particularly good learning experience. So at the Institute, what we provide is different ways of learning, but really wanting learners and students to interact in all these ways. We have an online learning campus, which has written learning materials. So we always ensure that written learning materials are regularly updated. It has presentations. We have virtual lectures, which people can listen back to, and similarly podcasts that people can listen to. You have a tutor for every module and unit of learning, and that tutor is an experienced individual who has worked in the industry. And we are also very keen on having regular learning webinars. So these are effectively webinars that you can join online or by telephone of around about 1 hour duration. So sometimes they would act as tutorials on the subject, and sometimes they would be Q&A sessions where effectively all the learners and the tutors are interacting together there. We also provide, in addition to the written materials, online learning library of journals and publications, so industry publications as well. So we're very keen that learning is as interactive as possible there. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So this slide is quite detailed, but this I've tried to focus here on the different types of qualifications. And clearly we can be more specific for individual learners as to what's most appropriate for them. So what I've detailed here is effectively the educational level and what people may recognize as the equivalent. So for example, level 3 would be equivalent to A levels as we know them in the United Kingdom, or hires potentially in Scotland and the home nations. Whereas level 4 would be equivalent to the first year of a degree, level 5 a second year of degree, and then you've got qualifications we offer that are effectively achieve bachelor's degrees and master's degrees as well. You've got a headline topic of the qualification title there, and some broad or specific pricing applicable. And clearly these qualifications will cover some specific or all the areas of international trade. Now, I'd just like to pick out a few here. So certainly we found the second one on the list, the award in international transport and documentation. We do understand sometimes for smaller businesses that time and cost potentially can be an issue. Especially if employees are multitasking in lots of different disciplines. So sometimes we find this area that covers some of the key principles of international trade, transport, documentation, customs, Incoterms, terms of trade is quite useful, and then it can be developed from there. So that's the award in international transport and documentation. You'll also see some there that under points to note that they're available for apprenticeship funding, and I'll speak shortly in the next slide in more detail on that. But focusing on some of the other qualifications there, we have specialism qualifications in finance. So for example, people who work in banks or financial services or work in finance departments of businesses or accountancy firms certainly find finance of international trade specialist qualification quite important. Equally, people who are working in sales and marketing probably find the international marketing specialist qualification quite important as well. And also we have selling services, software and skills overseas, very much focused towards businesses in the service sector there. Some of our most popular qualifications tend to be the likes of a level 4 diploma in international trade, the level 5 diploma in international trade, that will cover lots of different disciplines in international trade. So very much focused on getting those competency standards. And probably the last one I'd like to pick out for the moment on this slide is our diploma in World Customs Compliance and Regulations. This was a qualification that we introduced probably around about 3 to 4 years ago now. And we partly introduced it with the introduction of what is the European Union Customs Code and the recognition of authorized economic operator, trusted trader status. It's been a very successful qualification, and it's still used very heavily for businesses that are either AEO accredited or looking to become AEO accredited and meet competency standards. And we're also finding a lot of interest in this qualification at the moment with Brexit in mind, and clearly some of the issues on customs are appearing now on the front page of newspapers, and areas such as rules of origin, classification codes starting to become more commonly used words in the UK. So certainly that's an extremely popular qualification for that. So we move on to the next slide, please. So this slide is focused on international trade apprenticeships, and the actual qualification is detailed on the previous slide. So what I wanted to sort of do here is focus on the apprenticeship angle. So some of you will be aware of changes to the UK apprenticeship scheme. And the principle that all companies who have an annual pay bill over £3 million a year have to pay into an apprenticeship levy, and that's 0.5% of their pay bill that's paid in. So companies effectively can use that levy against applicable qualifications. But the good news is as well, smaller businesses who have a pay bill below £3 million can also access 90% of the costs of a qualification. So this allows small businesses as well to actually get access to apprenticeship funding. So as you can see from a slide there, that the Institute does have qualifications which meet the apprenticeship standards and which funding can be accessed. And that sort of starts from a qualification at level 3, which is focused on logistics, supply chain, and the key procedures in international trade, right through to a foundation degree, bachelor's degree, and a master's degree as well. So certainly for individuals looking to make a real career commitment and build a career in international trade, which is extremely rewarding, and also with skill shortages in the industry, it provides great career opportunities. Undertaking a foundation degree and then moving on to a bachelor's degree is a strong commitment, but it does provide very strong opportunities. In a similar vein, those who have already got bachelor's degrees and are looking for further recognition could possibly undertake a master's degree. Currently, that's available more for companies with larger cohorts, or if you like, more than 10 learners. But again, if anyone's interested in any of those apprenticeship qualifications, please let us know. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So what I've sort of been talking about in terms of apprenticeships in the previous slide, and the fact that costs can effectively be met through apprenticeship funding, the rules are slightly different in Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. And if there are anybody listening there, you're welcome to contact us so we can discuss those rules. It is fair to say that apprenticeships are evolving in the home nations. So in some of the home nations, for example, the funding is not always against an apprenticeship standard. It's against the actual qualification itself. And there are rules for the home nations. For any employee to access funding in England, they would probably need to spend more than 50% of their time in England, which may be difficult. But certainly there may be funding available for the home nations, and we're happy to have individual discussions in that respect if anyone is from the home nations there. So if we move on to the next slide, please, and probably sort of wrapping it up now. If you have any questions on any of the qualifications or anything I've said today, please feel free to email the Institute. The email address is noted on slide 14, course.inquiries@export.org.uk. So that can be an inquiry on any specific qualification. It could be an inquiry that I have this level of experience. I'm not sure which qualification is best for me. Can you make some suggestions? It could be that my employer wants to access the apprenticeship funding. We have a certain number of employees or one employee who's interested in this. How do we go about this? What are the next steps? So again, obviously, you're welcome to make inquiries. And if we just go to a final slide, slide 15, I've just drawn up here, and it could be argued this is more applicable for medium and larger businesses, but it is relevant for all businesses. I've just drawn up here, if you like, the types of job roles in international trade, and there are lots of different job roles. Different jobs go under different titles depending on the company. And there'll be some instances for smaller businesses where the individual is covering several of these job titles. But it just sort of gives you an indication here of the types of jobs, sometimes linked to educational level and clearly the level of experience, but it just gives you that indication. And I think before I finish, I'd just like to mention one more thing is, sometimes we get questions such as, I haven't got a bachelor's degree, I haven't studied for years, I'm going to struggle to do a qualification, aren't I? Well, in answer to that, and we do have some students in that position, is we are very sympathetic to people working and the challenges of work, and our learning is really built around supporting those challenges. And equally, it is about developing experience. So there will be some circumstances where individuals can start at a higher educational level if they have job experience already. So if you built that up and developed it, you might not have to start right at the beginning if you've got existing work experience. So again, that's something we're happy to consider, and also give people recognition for work experience as well. You've worked, say, for 10, 15 years in the industry, therefore you need some recognition of that, and it's only fair that we provide some of that recognition for you and allow you to get acknowledgement and a professional qualification. So thank you very much for listening there, and if you have any questions, we can certainly try and answer them later. If I can now pass you to Jen Butler, who will now talk about her experiences. Thank you very much for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on board. My name is Jen Butler, and I currently work for Mediterranean Shipping Company as a Trade Development Manager for Breakbulk Cargo. I attended the foundation degree in international trade with the Institute of Export and did choose to take on the bachelor's degree. Next slide, please, Will. So I discovered my niche in the international trade industry generally, originally working for a liner agent. I had taken a number of short courses relating to any and all aspects of shipping, and the Institute was a natural progression from NVQs that moved into the academic qualifications. So within my role at my previous employer, I'd moved very rapidly from a shipping and quotation clerk through to commercial manager for the business's liner activities. The foundation degree was a perfect timing and opportunity to understand how the decision making I was being asked to participate in would impact the greater business. The degree studied was actually the first cohort rolled out for the foundation degree, and it was jointly run with an open university, which links into what Kevin was saying a moment ago about webinars, access to individual tutors and the models, online learning materials availability, interaction between other students in the cohort as opposed to being completely isolated. I found the experience and the support provided by the Institute very helpful. Everyone was personable and approachable. You can see from that last paragraph there, the course content included international trade law, business environments. You've got some management skills, which were key, marketing strategy, international distribution, and each one of these courses all linked back to how international trade works itself, which has been quite vital to my personal development as well as my professional. Next slide, please, Will. This foundation degree proved to be a very practical implementation between academic and practical hands-on learning, which was great for me. I did not have the opportunity to go to a full-on university, but with this being the industry that was my home, this was absolutely perfect for me. It's been a very pleasant experience as a student, but also I was able to give feedback on the courses and the modules, which meant that I could help make it better for the next generation. Just to summarize those last 3 points there, understanding what impact our decision makes on the rest of the business, to the industry, to our economy is vital. And I am a huge supporter of education in international trade. And it's such a vast topic, it's impossible to have one degree cover absolutely everything, or one qualification, one apprenticeship. But this industry is not seen as an attractive one for young people at this time, and educational aspects or opportunities are not prevalent. So if we can do something to make education of interest in our industry, we take responsibility for our actions, we reduce risk, we could increase opportunities, we improve our efficiency and our effectiveness within ourselves, our teams, our staff. So for me, it's been an absolute wonder. That's just my personal experience. A bit of a shameless plug, as I was the first part of that first cohort. I was lucky enough to be the face of the foundation degrees international trade. So that is me with my previous employer. That is me wrapping up. I'll be back for Q&A a bit later on, but if I may hand over to fellow panelist Gail Leeson. Thank you.
Well, hello, thanks there, Jen. Hi, I'm Gail Leeson. I work for Thales, which is a military company. My background was I came up through the being a PA and ended up helping out on export controls when someone went sick. And I think that sort of thing does tend to happen in trade compliance a lot, where somebody fills in. You don't get the younger apprentices coming through and the younger people that particularly want to focus in trade compliance. So if I could have my second slide, please, there. What we decided to do was move the export controls, which my background there, I stepped in to look after UK export licensing, and I had about 4 years experience of that. But the company decided to bring import and export procedures in-house. So I had to learn from scratch actually how to make customs entries and be prepared for audits. So we had to learn from scratch. We had to learn IPR, as well as keeping things like military compliance under controls, because obviously being a military company, we have a great deal of focus on that. Okay, what I found was studying from scratch. I did the Diploma in World Customs Compliance and Regulations. So they give you a sound background into the origins of the regulations you're looking at. So you really do start from scratch. You can know nothing at all about international trade, and all of a sudden you're well into, right from the very beginning, from the World Trade Organization through to the EU, and then through to the UK regulations. And you can see how the regulations actually flow down, so that when you do come to giving compliant exports, you can understand the processes behind and what you actually need to prove. We're given a clear understanding of the customs procedures, such as warehousing, the use of the tariff, essential tools that you need when you're working in international trade, and the mechanisms of what to use and how to keep your trade costs down. So if you're not careful and you're not understanding your Incoterms and perhaps your procurement department don't understand Incoterms, when you're actually making that compliant import, you are the one that's actually seeing the duty go on. So you're making reports back to people so that they understand what they need to do to implement the trade controls accurately, so that you keep your business costs down. Have a next slide there, please. So what have I gained? I've gained such a lot. My own personal confidence has grown so completely, because I now understand what I'm doing and why I do what we do. I contribute to insight into what will and won't work for an export bid or a project. I can explain the reasoning in terms that the engineers understand, because that's something very important. An engineer will say to you, well, why can't we just do it like that? And you can say, well, you need to look at this, and we have to put this in place. You can do it, but there is a mechanism to do it. There is a process to follow, and we have to do it within the regulations. And once you say regulations and you can name them and explain how we have to implement them, then you're off. It tends to work. So I help with export planning. I write papers for new projects that come up. We are looking at Brexit planning. Brexit is my favorite subject, and I do tend to bang on a lot about it, but everything makes more sense when you look into the background of trade compliance, and then you apply it to the rhetoric that's coming from Parliament. You can actually go and read the white papers that are coming from Parliament and understand and criticise what it is they're trying to say and why you think it's not going to work, or why you think it could work, or how to make it work. But then to actually implement it within the company that you're working for. And I think the most important thing about the diploma for me, and I think for most people, I think most people would say this, is that when you're studying in that diploma, you're looking at the business you work for. So my company paid for my course fees, which was really, I was very lucky. But I have paid that back 100-fold just by understanding what I need to do to help the company save money. I think it's really important when it comes to something like Brexit to understand that it's people like us at the coalface that are making the compliant imports and exports. It's us that will have to make the Brexit work and keep the cost impact to the company down and keep it as little as possible. And I think that might just finish me off there. I'll be answering questions later, I think.
Great, many thanks. Many thanks, Gail, and to Kevin and Jen as well. Really great to hear from our recent students at the end and to hear a bit more about the impact of studying trade qualifications. So yeah, as Gail mentioned, we're now going to open the floor for questions. So please do feel free to ask questions using the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And the first question actually picks up on your last point, Gail, and it's from Louis, and he asks, in terms of Brexit, how do the qualifications help you prepare for what might change after Brexit? Gail, if do you have anything more to say to that? And then after that, I'll open up to
Yes, I'm quite happy to answer that one. I think what you get or what you attain is an overview of something as important as, for example, if you're looking at AEO, for example, and then a Prime Minister's speech might bring out information about linking that you can link into maybe a customs notice that you've seen. Documentation that's actually coming out of customs that's published on websites where you can actually go and interrogate the information that you're able to find because you've been directed towards it because you've done the course. So, for example, one of the main features of the Union Customs Code is that we're preparing for entrance into declarants records. So you would have one file, for example, where you would keep all your compliance data. And that perhaps what we're looking at, what the government has said is that they're looking, or they've implied that blockchain would be supporting that sort of file, and that customs would be able to have direct access to those records, and that once you'd completed that record, that it's stuck, it's solid in time, which frees up customs to look in your records without actually having to have someone visit. It helps with trusted trader. So there's I think to summarize is it gives you the ability to understand and interrogate the information you already have against what you're hearing coming out of the government or from speeches or that sort of thing. Does that help?
Yes, I think so. That was really useful. And I don't know, Kevin, do you have anything else to add to that as well?
Yeah, I think Gail summarised it very well. Certainly, we are aware of the importance of keeping all the learning materials up to date, and clearly, international trade is one of those areas where things are very fluid. Certainly with Brexit in mind and exchange rate implications, for example. So the learning will obviously reflect concrete requirements as they develop. But I think, as Gail's indicated, it's also about understanding the sort of principles about why these rules are in place, because ultimately these rules, whether they are around valuation of goods, origin of goods, classification, are set at a world level. And understanding why then starts to bring into an understanding of what could happen on Brexit and how companies then prepare. So certainly we would prefer a situation where companies at least understand the implications of Brexit so they can plan accordingly and are not left in a situation where everything is last minute.
Thank you both. And now a question I'm going to put to Jen then Gail, and it's a two-parter from Sam. So the question is, to what extent were you able to apply the things you were learning during the qualification to your own business experience? And then Sam also asks, how did you find balancing doing the qualification with the work you were doing as your job? So Jen, do you want to have a go at that?
Yes, of course, I'd be delighted. To address the first element, how was I able to apply that to my job? On a practical level, it was extraordinarily helpful. I deal with, in this role, as well as my previous, all sorts of aspects of shipping. So I have to be aware of contract law, understanding bills of lading, and their importance to the cargo that we're working with. I've had to learn, I've been able to apply the practical aspects of actually physically moving goods and what laws and regulations apply, where the insurance comes in, keeping on top of something as straightforward as Incoterms. You'd be surprised how many people working in our industry don't understand Incoterms and where the transfer of risk and cost happens. They've all been very practical applications, which is how I generally tend to work myself. It's been an innumerable it's not even quantifiable how practically it's been of help to me. But I've also been able to make decisions and be aware of potential consequences because of that knowledge. So a prime example, a couple of years ago, I had a large parcel going to India. It turns out that the bills of lading had been incorrectly applied. They needed to be reworked, endorsed, stamped, released, and there wasn't enough time to do it. With the knowledge that I had picked up from the foundation degree, I was able to correctly direct each of the separate teams involved to do their bit to make sure that it all came together for a constructive solution, and that saved hundreds of thousands of dollars, because the cargo would have had to have stayed on the ship if we had not been able to find a solution for a titular document. In terms of managing a work-life balance, it does require a lot of personal commitment. There were a lot of times where, with a full-on lower level management role, I would have to go home and work on my degree on a personal level. It was worth it for me, but it does involve an investment. My employer was very sympathetic and allowed me study days and a few hours here and there to work on the paperwork, but to produce a document or a degree for which you can truly see a reward, it needs much more than trying to do it in your working hours. I hope I don't sound patronizing with that statement, but it needs to be an emotional as well as an academic investment from the individual participating as well as the employer sending their employee on. I hope that is okay. Obviously happy to answer any further follow-up, and I'll hand over to Gail now.
How did I apply it? I have to say that I knew so little about what I was going to be taking on when we brought the import and exports in-house. I had no background at all in that, so learning from scratch was a perfect start. But academically, I had 4 modules to sit. My first module, I just had completely melted down completely on how to actually apply the academic side of it. It is very academic. Anyway, I applied. I think what happened with me was that we had we brought on a new program, that something we'd never done before. We were refurbishing mine hunters in Thailand. So we've refurbished ships before, but we'd never done it outside of the EU. So I based my thesis on the management of the exports and the whole program of exports to Thailand. I was astonished at what I'd learned and was able to put into that document, and I was able to pass that over to the program managers and say, look, this is what we do, this is the processes that we use, these are what we need to put in place to be compliant to regulations. I was also able to say, this is what we're expecting in Thailand. This is what I suggest you look into. And one of the things I suggested they look into was warehousing and using the warehouse process in Thailand, because we were refurbishing Royal Thai Navy vessels. So we didn't actually use that warehousing process, but if we had, we would have saved so much more money. There was such a lot that you could look at and suggest, but not necessarily that was taken on by the programs. And I do tend to find that quite a lot. It just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of explanation as to why we need to do something a certain way, and then you get the recognition that you're actually saying something that you can back up and people can relate to and then work with. And once they know what they're working with, you're off. And I think that for me has been one of the greatest benefits, and the company's seen that benefit too. I'm not saying that I'm the world's most perfect person, because I'm not. This trade compliance, as anyone who works in it will tell you, it is so diverse. No one person is an expert in anything, but if you can grasp the concepts, and as Jen said about Incoterms, for example, we have a lot of people in our company simply don't know how to apply Incoterms. And when you're exporting a global export contract to Thailand from different places around the globe, Incoterms are vital. To get the shipping terms right is very important. How did I balance the learning with actually working. I don't know if I did. I certainly didn't balance it very well. My company were to give me 5 hours a month to study, and to be honest, I think I might have studied 25 hours a month under certain conditions. And with each module, with the 4 modules that I did, there would be a 6-week a module submission where you would submit your documents that you would have taken the 6 weeks before to prepare, and that was full on. I would have to take a week off for each time that I actually had something to submit. I had one Christmas holiday completely wiped out because I was working so hard on it. But the thing is, you get so into it, and I know my family said I was very unsociable, and I think I was. But you get so sucked into what you're doing. It's enthralling. It's terribly rewarding. And then to come out of it wearing a cap and gown in Mansion House in London was fabulous. So I would recommend it. But as Jen said, it takes a lot of commitment. Can I hand that back to you, Will?
Yes, thank you. That's both answers were absolutely fantastic there. So thank you both for very honest and deep, full answers there. This is going to be a question, I think, for Kevin now. It's from Harry, and he's asking, as someone who works in a trade compliance role, he's asking, in terms of the increasing importance of customs compliance, which of the qualifications would you recommend him to take? So over to you, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the question. I think based on the profile, it is very much likely that the Diploma in World Customs Compliance and Regulation is likely to be the most appropriate qualification. So some of the uniqueness about the qualification is it shows a link between customs and trade. So it will show how things interact. As I've indicated, how things operate initially at a world level, and the rules of international trade as set by the World Trade Organization and the World Customs Organization, but then it sort of goes down to practical application of those rules. So how those rules are interpreted by customs authorities and ultimately by the actual business themselves. So it's likely that's going to be the most appropriate, and I think what we've seen a lot at the Institute, and I think what the industry's seen is the importance of the trade compliance role. I sort of alluded to the fact earlier that a sort of skill shortage existed potentially in international trade, and that's not just in the UK, by the way. So it's not always easy to for businesses, potentially smaller and medium-sized businesses, to train people. But it is extremely rewarding, and it is a way of getting people to commit to your business. And trade compliance is certainly one of those areas with increased regulation, whether that's through the and recognition through the authorized economic operator status, through compliance with licensing regulations, sanction regulations, and even areas such as anti-bribery and corruption as well. So but I would say, based on the profile, that the Diploma in World Customs Compliance and Regulations is the most suitable qualification. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And another question we've had in is from Jack, who's asked, he has over 10 years experience in trade and logistics, but is still looking for exemptions based on work experience rather than qualifications. Is that possible? Kevin, are you able to talk to that?
Yeah, so again, thank you for the question. Yes, it is. So what would tend to happen is we have entry criteria for our qualifications, and as I mentioned, those that do have industry experience, it's only fair that we recognise that experience. So if, for example, somebody understands how Incoterms operate, what a commercial invoice looks like, for example, what the role of a bill of lading is, then they built that experience. And generally, when we say exemptions, what would apply is that you would start at a certain educational level. So you wouldn't maybe start, for example, someone newer to the industry would perhaps start at educational level 3 and for example, our certificate in international trade, you could potentially start at a higher level, either level 4 or possibly even level 5, obviously depending on the number of years experience and also what your job role and aspirations are. So there are certainly examples there where someone with that work experience and that industry experience, it's recognised. So in answer, yes, it is possible to start at a higher educational level. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think we're running slightly low on questions now, so I guess we're going to wrap up on that note. So thank you once again to Kevin, Gail, and Jen. Thank you for your time today. And I hope everyone has found that useful. Thank you all. Right, so I'm just probably go a few quick notes. So this summer, the summer's closing, and as is often the way, lots is coming up to tell you about in the autumn. There's the Queen's Award for Enterprise, a prestigious annual award for UK businesses, which could see your business gain worldwide recognition and be invited to a royal reception in the summer. That's an ongoing thing, and the deadline to apply for that is September 12th. You can find information about that on the website listed there. And the Institute is also taking its World Trade Summit programme to both Liverpool and Coventry in September and then November. Our World Trade Summits feature some of the leading experts in international trade and are great networking events too, so definitely worth a visit. To register to either of those, please go to export.org.uk/events. There are now only 4 days left for companies from anywhere in the world to enter the Open to Export International Business Awards. It's a competition we've been running this summer with the World Trade Organization and the International Chamber of Commerce as part of their Small Business Champions initiative. It's a really great chance for SMEs to win $5,000 towards your export action plans, and the final will be taking place in Geneva in October as part of the WTO's public forum. More information can be found about those at opentoexport.com/international-business-awards. Finally, our next webinar will see us joined again by Bibby Financial Services, who will be guiding new exporters through the ways in which they can overcome the funding challenges often associated with entering international trade. That's on Wednesday next week, on September 5th, and again, you can find sign-up details for all of our future webinars on opentoexport.com/webinars, and we'll also be posting a recording of this webinar there too. As always, please do take our exit survey to let us know what you thought of today's webinar and to give us any suggestions for improvements or for future topics. But for now, goodbye.